org. I am so jazzed to chat with one of my favorite people on the planet. He is a cyclist, author, television commentator, the man from the Tour de France, Mr. Bob Roll. Bobke, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great, Bob. Thanks for engaging me in this. This is going to be fun. I'm really stoked about this.
Yeah, so born in NorCal, born in Oakland.
Yeah.
And I loved reading that people probably can't relate to this, but you guys, your family every night ate dinner together. And actually each kid, or like 4 kids, their job was to basically say something, prepare a story from the day.
Yes. And also there was for a nickel, if you could stump the family, you got a nickel. If somebody knew the answer to the question you asked, they got the nickel. So there was incentive, like in those days, powerful incentive.
Yeah, nickel's powerful.
Yeah, come up with a factoid that you could dazzle the family with. And of course, you had to entertain our parents throughout. So those meals went on for a long time, but it did give all of us maybe a little bit of an ability to tell and, keep a story, even if there's a lot of different.
Right. And keep an audience engaged.
Yeah.
In an audience that was looking to shut you down.
Yes. And everybody was always trying to, interject. So listening and telling stories became a big part of every single evening. And it drove me crazy. And I needed to do many miles on the bicycle by myself to cure myself of that. But it has served me well in the intervening years.
So what were your sports growing up?
I think Little League Baseball was the first participation sport.
Yeah.
But we grew up on this sort of warren of cul-de-sacs. And in those days, every family had 4, 5, 6 kids. So there was, within walking distance, 500 kids. And so we were always building forts, playing kick the can, frisbee, trying to hula hoop, skateboards had just come out. So it was a really interesting time and place to grow up. And I don't know if anywhere, kids grow up like that, not just the United States, but anywhere.
Yeah.
Where you have so many children going bananas, completely unsupervised, basically all day except at school. So breakfast and dinner, otherwise out of the house.
Well, yeah. And you also had to have, there was an art form on our block of, I'd go to your house and say, hey, Bob, we're going to be playing baseball out in the street. Yep. And what's the first thing you're going to say is, who else is playing? Because you don't want to be the only guy. And so I'd say, oh, I got Larry and Jimmy and Donnie. And then, have to go to their house and get them in because now I got you in.
Yeah, it was a great place to grow up in time for us.
So running, people don't realize that Bob Roll was a runner. You run cross country and track?
In high school, yeah. And AAU in 8th grade. So I started with the AAU age group program in Northern California, very competitive, and was pretty fast, but not the fastest guy in the state by any means. But then in high school, we had a great team, great coach, and it was incredibly competitive. Like half of the Olympic team came from NorCal in those days. So
true.
I thought it was lame running, really fast times because you get, do a 155 880 as a sophomore and get 4th in a race. And like, oh, I'm 4th. My parents were so disappointed. All
they knew was 4th. They didn't know the time.
No, they didn't know. So it would have been the fastest time in any other state except California, just about. So anyways, so the running was, we ran everywhere all the time.
Right. And
through that, I met Scott Molina. And
exactly.
He was a phenomenal athlete, way ahead of me when we started, way, way, way ahead. And he figured out that triathlon was going to be a big thing and was one of the early superstars of triathlon and made, he was the first guy to make money.
He really was.
Have a house, have a car, all of that stuff in the early 80s, which to me was like, that is phenomenal. How am I going to do that?
So did you guys both get into cycling at about the same time?
He went straight to triathlon. He might have done a couple of bike races, but he was doing these ultra distance runs, 50 and 100 mile races.
Yeah.
and me by half an hour, just ludicrously. I mean, just unbelievable. I mean, he had kids already, so he was already, trying to pay his mortgage and stuff. And we were like still like children, the rest of us, but Scott was light years ahead of us. But I don't think he raced bikes, and he might have done some races during his triathlon career, but he saw the prize list in Kona and was like, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
So for you, but you guys rode together, right? I remember hearing
yeah.
these 200-mile rides to Chico and things like that.
He would swim in the morning while I was still sleeping. Then we would ride together all day. And then he would go for a run after we were done riding. And I was laid out for 2 or 3 days after these big rides, and he just, he was, I mean, I was like, there's no way. I need some time to think. I can't be up that early. I'm sleeping. I can't, there's just no way I could get up that early to do some swimming and then run afterwards. I had to, there's no way I could do that. So, and Scott was just really phenomenal. His work ethic was astounding, really was amazing.
Well, I remember him telling me once that when he got into the sport, because he knew enough sports science to know that the top swimmers were swimming 30,000, 40,000 meters a week. The top cyclists were going 300 to 500 miles a week, and the top runners were 80 to 100. So I'll just put all those together and I'll become really good if I don't die.
He was right.
So you guys would do like 200-mile rides, stop, buy a chicken at a 7-Eleven, and keep riding.
Yep. Yeah,
and
it was awesome.
This is before the days of Polypro and things like that. How'd you guys stay warm?
I had some of my mom's cashmere sweaters, and I would just layer them. The sleeves only came up to about here. But I would put 2 or 3 t-shirt and then a couple of sweaters, and if it was really cold and rainy, like 3 sweaters, and stayed warm that way. Or my dad's plaid shirts that were made out of wool, those Pendleton shirts, and I would just ride in that. I mean, there wasn't rain jackets, there wasn't that was just starting to come in. So a couple of years into riding in bad weather all the time, the clothing became much better. But initially it was, with Scott, it was like, we would go to the thrift store and buy some old sweaters and for $1. And that was that was our technical gear for the winter.
Molina said he loved your mother's sweaters. He was like, hey, those are pretty sweet.
They were awesome. They were, I don't know. I haven't tried to use one in a while, but I'm sure they're still keep you warm.
So what were you guys riding? What type of bikes were you riding? Do you have good quality bikes?
They were pure rubbish. Steel bike, whatever parts you could find, and lots of tires. We had sew-up tires in those days, tubulars, so had to carry a couple of those everywhere you went, and did a lot of hitchhiking when you would run out of tires because you had 3 flats.
What's one of the wildest experiences that you and Molina had riding together?
I'll tell you, he saved my life one time.
What happened?
We rode like 150 miles from Pittsburgh to like the foot of the Sierras, and then started riding back through the Delta. So Delta dead flat, and I think he was trying to simulate the long time trial courses of the Ironman. So we're doing a huge ride, and I don't remember exactly how we got tangled up, but these levee roads, super narrow, and cars are going like 90 miles an hour, right past your ear. And then they had never seen cyclists. There was no bike paths. And we got tangled up, and I fell off of this levee, and it was built with these giant rocks. And I cascaded down on my head and was knocked out.
No helmet.
No helmet. No, they hadn't even invented helmets yet. I mean, there might have been the early Bell, but I didn't have enough money for a helmet. I can't.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't know. They're not required. Yeah, it's a completely different. To explain this to people now, it seems completely insane. But I was knocked out, and I started coming to, and Scott was, carrying me up from the bottom of the levee to try to flag a car down.
Yeah.
And he flagged down a van, and I think that they were sniffing glue out on the levee. I swear. And Scott was completely flipped out, and I had a giant cut on the back of my head. So I was bleeding, down my shoulders. And I was like, what is this stuff? Oh my God. And coming in and out of consciousness. And the guys were like, the van was full of fumes. And so that wasn't that, the best, but he went straight to the emergency room, the nearest emergency room, and dropped me off and bolted. But if I was by myself and did that, I'd still be there.
Yeah, exactly.
So Scott saved my life. That was the craziest thing that happened in those days.
Now, Scott was obviously focused on triathlon. Were you thinking you were bike racing?
Yes, I had started bike racing. This is probably 1981, maybe 1982. So I think he might have done an Ironman already.
He did 81. Yeah, he came over to do 81. And he ended up collapsing. He saw John Howard, who was leading the race, and he's thinking, oh, I'll catch him. He looks like crap. I'm going to catch him. Next thing he knows, he's on a stretcher with all his skin peeling off.
he got burnt so bad, right?
Yep. He was like a snake. He basically lost his skin.
I remember him the next day when he got home, and he was pulling like giant. I was like, oh mercy, Scott, what happened? He's like, yeah, I miscalculated. I'm like, whew.
You think? So were you having success as a bike racer?
So in those days, there was category 4 was basic entry level, and then there was 3, and 2 and 1 were basically the same.
Right.
Category 1, 2, and the system is still, it's a little bit different now. Juniors, under 23, and elite level. And then world tours, the highest level. So in Northern California, also very competitive in cycling in those days.
Right.
And so Cat 4 races were pretty hard. And to upgrade to category 2, you had to win 3 category 4 races, then 3 category 2 races, or excuse me, 3 Cat 3 races. So in 6 races, I had, I won 6 in a row.
Wow.
Yeah, so they upgraded me to Cat 2, and then it became a lot more difficult and I think Berkeley Hills Road Race was my first category 1-2 race, and I was 5th or 6th.
Yep.
And some of the best guys in the country were racing, and it's a really hard, hilly road race, a 100-mile road race. And, I didn't have any feeders. I didn't have any, I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a 1 water bottle for 100 hilly miles in the East Bay heat. And so I knew I had to sip it. I could only take a little bit, so much. And then I remember the last 10 miles, it was completely delirious. And so it took a long time, to learn the tactics and what's required to be competitive, and eventually met Mike Neal.
Yes.
Who was already a legend and had been one of the very first road racing professionals in Europe after doing good in the 76 Olympics, turned pro. So along with Greg LeMond and George Mount, one of the very first Americans to race professionally on the road in Europe. And he was also from Oakland, from just north of Oakland, El Sobrante, I think. And he became the coach of 7-Eleven and was coaching a team called CD Turin in Northern California.
Yeah.
And so asked me to join that, became my coach, and was my coach my whole road racing career, actually. So I owe a huge debt to Mike Neal for my career.
So what brought you from being in the US to deciding you're going to go race in Europe? Because you think about it, I think back then to make money in the States, it was really more of a criterium based racing, right? And that's where the money was. And that's not really your strong suit compared to more of a long, hard.
Yeah, I need 250 Ks to
to warm up, right? So is that what brought you to Europe? The racing suited you more?
Yeah, it suited me, and I was fascinated by it. I saw CBS's coverage of Paris-Roubaix in maybe 1982, and I told everybody in the Berkeley Bike Club I'm doing that, even though they had dropped me every single club ride for months. And then in 1986, I was there.
So they're watching on TV the guy that they drop every week, and you're racing in Peru. Like, this guy can't even race with us. What the hell?
I announced to the club, oh, I'm doing that. I am going to be doing that. They're like, dude, whatever. And it was, everybody's goal was to race in Europe as a professional.
Right.
There wasn't a sort of domestic, road
race.
No
money here.
Yeah, there wasn't any big races at that time, although there's some historical races that were, Tour of Nevada City, Tour of Somerville, a lot of big road races in the United States, and the Coors Classic had already started, the Red Zinger, and then the Coors Classic. But, Paris-Roubaix, Tour de France, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Tour of Lombardia, those, Tour of Italy, Tour of Spain, that was what everybody was fascinated with and fixated on, everybody. And so I sort of was interested because of the Northern California cycling scene, and having seen Paris-Roubaix on TV, that really inspired me to want to do that. And so when our team was invited, to me, it was like a dream come true. It was, of course, Team 711. It was really, and I wanted to finish, even though it's a pretty, it's probably my third or fourth professional race, actually. And I was really desperate to finish. And I think I was the only guy on the team that did finish that particular edition. And so the learning process started all over again, from just the basics of the sport to racing in Europe at the highest level. So I had enough tenacity and ability to make my dreams come true.
I don't think people realize that. So Molina was telling me he was getting postcards from you and you were living under a bridge in a tent or something.
I lived in, to make my bones over there. There was no, now there's all kinds of resources. Right. And you just have to Google, racing in Europe,
Yeah.
And you can have, a million pages of resources. Yeah. And imagine you don't have that and you just fly over there. So before I started racing for 7-Eleven, and after I'd just done a year domestically, I'm like, Europe is where it's at. I'm going, and these are the resources I have.
Yeah.
I have $1,000. I have to live for 8 months. And so there was a camping area. I should publish a photo of me standing in front of my tent, but I lived in a tent for 6 or 7 months in Switzerland.
Yeah.
All the time. Had a rain jacket at that point. So if not, I would have died of hypothermia. But, and in Switzerland, I was on a Swiss team.
Yeah.
From the French-speaking part, from Geneva. And so you have your license, and you can go 2 or 3 times a week and race all over the country. And you can take your bike on the train, go to the town, sign on, race. You can either ride home, take the train home. And so that was a year that it's sort of, there was no way for me to communicate with anybody except write postcards. And I didn't have an address. So, and Scott was one of the only people that I had his address. So I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't speak Swissy Dutch, Yes. It was a dialect that was completely impossible for me to learn. And so I barely spoke to anybody for many, many months. In the races, I had no idea what they were saying. I had completely clueless. But they had a schedule for the year and the time and the town, and I just would go all over on the train in Switzerland and race.
So
that was really fun.
I think Davis Finney told me when he and Kiefel, I think they were like, did they run into you by your tent or something? And then next thing you know, you're on Team 7-Eleven.
One of the biggest stage races for amateurs, and where Eastern Bloc riders could race against a European, was called the William Tell. And it was a stage race for amateurs, 2 weeks, really hard stage race, as hard as the Tour of Switzerland. And Davis, after the '84 Olympics, and Ron Kiefel and Andy Hampston they were on the national team, and they were racing that. And so the last day finished in Zurich. So I rode over from my tent and just watched the race finish. And Davis won.
Yeah.
Davis won the final stage. And it was a very impressive. And I was like, wait, I know that dude. That's Davis Finney. I was like, so I followed them to the team car just to say hi. And then they're like, come over to the hotel and have lunch. And I'm like, free lunch? Oh, yes, baby. And so went over to the hotel, and Davis wanted to go home. And the rest of the team was going to Italy.
Yeah.
To keep racing and they invited me to go to Italy with them. And I mean, I was there next morning, 7 a.m. with my little satchel packed for a week of free food in Italy and 3 hard races. And I was flying. Once I started to get enough food to have nutrition, I was flying in those races. So the team coaches were like, we've never even heard of you. And I knew some of the riders, so I kind of had started to figure out the tactics.
Yeah.
And so we did 2 races that were flat, big field sprints, and then we had a hilly road race. And I pushed on the pedal so hard that the spokes pulled out of the rear hub, and my wheel disintegrated in the finale. And I had one guy to beat in the sprint. And I started, what is happening? And I looked down, and my whole rear wheel disintegrated, and I didn't have a spare wheel, so I got smoked. The pack caught me, and I had to walk across the finish line. And I was like, that was pretty devastating. But I was happy that that I stomped all the guys on the national team on that day.
I don't think people understand, because back then Americans were sort of really not a factor in Europe, right? And when Team 711 started, you guys were sort of the bad news bears. You know, you had your little motor home. Everybody's got their huge buses, and you guys are going to races. And that, talk a little about just, I remember, I think you told me once that one time you guys showed up at a race, and your team coordinator showed up like he was 3 days late, right? You guys are all lined up. You have no bikes, no nothing. And you see this guy across the pitch coming at you?
Yeah, so the first year was 85.
Yeah.
The first year we did the tour was 86. And the tour, there's tons of resources. Every team is basically on the same level resource-wise at the Tour de France, because all the hotels have already been provided for, all the meals, all of the technical support. And that is not the case in those days in the smaller races. And there was a lot of by hook or crook getting across Europe. And we didn't have a place over there to stay, so there was no home base. So we were going from one hotel to the next. And we traveled with our bikes on the airplane and our team suitcases. And we had done the Tour of Denmark. And the next day we flew to the Tour of Britain, and it started on the Wednesday. So Wednesday through Sunday, we have Tour of Britain. And the team car, we had one sedan. That was it. And 6 guys in the sedan. So, and so they missed the ferry across the channel from Denmark to, I think we started in Edinburgh. So they had to take the ferry across to wherever, and then drive up to Scotland, and missed the ferry. The next one was sold out. So they were a couple of days late, and had all of our suitcases and all of our bikes. So we walked to the start and we didn't have anything. And I remember Alex Steeda, Eric Heiden was on that team.
Yeah.
Jens Vegerby, I think. This is 87. So we had started to, know a little bit what to do, but still it was hit or miss. And so the race promoter who had invited us just couldn't believe we didn't have anything. And we had no way to tell him beforehand. We're at the dormitory we're just, like every other team. And so he's like, what the heck? Where's your numbers? where's your bikes? Where's your uniform? We're like, yeah, it hasn't gotten here yet. And he's like, this race is starting in 20 minutes. And the whole pro peloton is lined up there. Eric van der Arden and Laurent Fignon and Alan Piper. And we're like, sorry.
What can we do?
And then we see the team car coming in, the bikes are on top of it. And driving 90 miles an hour. And it started in this castle. And there was no way to get to the castle because the roads were closed for the race, except drive across the lawn. And so the whole peloton looked. So we kitted up, grabbed our bikes off the top, and we were pinning our numbers on in the neutral section of the race. And then the race turned out pretty good. I had the famous episode a few days later of clipping out in the middle of Cardiff Castle and losing a stage. And the next day, Jens Vegerby, they rang the bell, right? And 1 lap to go. He takes off, wins, and as he was coming across the line, they rang the bell again for for another lap. And there was a lap counter. This is in downtown London. And I saw 2 to go and heard the bell. I'm like, oh, that's not right, you know? And so we lost 2 stages in 2 days. And I mean, it was a lot of crazy disorganizational type of things going on. But, you know, that gave us a chance through, you know, losing to learn how to win big races and not make those kind of mistakes, those basic mistakes. But the early days were you know, it was hard. It's hard to laugh at losing a professional bike race.
Yeah.
And I still haven't gotten over losing the race because my pedal disintegrated when I was about to win a stage of the Tour of Britain. I'm like, and I was in the breakaway with one other guy, passed him with, you know, 100 meters to go, and we're on the cobbles in the center of Cardiff Castle. And, you know, I was trying to pedal with one leg, but the chain had fallen off because the cobbles were so rough. And so in spite of that, I barely lost by like that much. And I was so angry.
Oh my God.
And it took another year to have a chance to win another race for me, you know? So you had to be tenacious. You couldn't, and you had to accept the fact that there was going to be a lot of mistakes made. So
a lot of people coming from the US, you know, have problems with the food, the language, being away from home. You're one of those guys who just seem to really love it.
Yeah.
The languages, the culture, every aspect of it. And almost was like, I don't really want to go home. I sort of like it here.
Yeah, I could have stayed for, you know, I did miss the States and miss being home and miss being, you know, doing my training regime in the wintertime.
Right.
So by October, I was pretty, you know, but I, you know, get there in February. I wasn't bored until October. That's pretty good average.
That's really good. So 3-time Tour de France, 3-time Giro. My favorite Giro story was 88, obviously. Gavia Pass, snowfall, snowstorm, Andy Hampsten. Would you have to ride back and forth to help Andy out? How many times?
So, I mean, the weather was like completely bonkers. We did a couple of climbs before the Gavia. It was already snowing, and these were like half the altitude. And so Andy, you know, he had the wherewithal to understand, like, we're at 4,000 feet. It's snowing. We're going to 9,000 feet. It's going to be insane. So he's like, could you go get some gloves? You know, so it, you know, and it takes a while to get off the back of the peloton, find the team car, get back through the peloton. And you see that in every race on TV all the time, like the teammates going back, and it's like, okay, I feel
crazy. It means you're going back, and then you have to go past all these top. You're passing the best cyclists in the world to go get up to Andy.
Andy had to like special stretch Gore-Tex technical gear that he didn't want to lose. He couldn't just chuck it on the side of the road. So on the Gavia Pass, he asked me to take his jacket because, you know, when you're climbing, you're generating enough warmth. You don't need a big, heavy, you know, weatherproof jacket like that. So I took that back to the team car. And when I got there, the team car had a pair of, you know, warm, dry gloves for Andy.
Not for you, but
No,
for Andy.
no. And he said, and the team, Mike Neal said, take these up to Andy. I'm like, dude, I just came from there. And this is on the Gavia Pass. You know, my job's done. Andy was third wheel going into the Gavia Pass. I'm like, I could, you know, go nice. And so,
Yeah.
And so halfway up the climb, I had to catch the leaders. And I was like yelling at him from a switchback down, like, Andy, I have your gloves. And he's like, I know, bring them over here. Give them to me. I'm like, oh my God. So made a big effort. And you know, he was warm and dry enough to take the leader's jersey at the end of that stage. Whereas it was so insane. And, you know, they'll never have they have a extreme weather protocol now, and they'll never see a race like that ever again.
Ever again.
Professional cycling, which is a good thing. You know, guys had hypothermia, myself included.
Yes.
A lot of guys got into cars because they thought, oh, this must be canceled. You can't ride through the snow, and drove off the top of the final climb, the Gavia, to the finish. But it was so insane that there were only maybe 35 or 40 guys that made the time limit that actually rode the whole course that day, you know. Wow. So you can't have the Giro for another 10 days with 30 guys. So everybody was allowed back in the next day. And then we had a real fight after that for the rest of the Giro.
7-time Paris-Roubaix. Was that your favorite race, Paris-Roubaix?
Well, it's the one that I thought I could do the best at, you know.
Yeah.
And I did race the finale a couple of times, which, you know, when you see that Matt Heyman, for example, had done it 15 times before he won, it's just, that is such a special race. And, you know, it's the first time I saw professional cycling from Europe. And so I always made that a focus of my spring campaign. And we were not a classics team. A lot of times Ron Kiefel and I, or myself, or Ron Kiefel by himself, were the only guys doing the finale on the team until we had Steve Bauer, and he joined in 1990. And then it was a different, there's a guy that can win these races. And so that, you know, we were good in the stage race. I had won the Giro before that, Tour of Switzerland, a lot of other big races, but Steve Bauer brought a chance to do well in the classics, like actually get big results. And he lost Paris-Roubaix by 2 millimeters in 1990 for 7-Eleven. And so, yeah, but my focus was, and my abilities were one day super long.
Yeah.
And Paris-Roubaix was
it.
And you know, Liège-Bastogne-Liège was one of them, Milano-San Remo, and I was there in the finale. But you need numbers to win those. And when you see, like nowadays, the team with 2 or 3 guys in the last 20 have a huge advantage. And unless you're on a spectacular day, usually the team with the numbers, like Quick Step, we see that a lot. Jumbo-Visma, we see that a lot. Teams with that kind of focus and that kind of horsepower, and the teammates, they win the classics. That hasn't changed since I was a pro. So you need more than one guy. You can't, in a one-day race, you can't overcome 2 or 3 really strong guys. And it's just not possible.
So one time you and I were chatting about, you know, Le Mans and Fignon in '89, and how on the last stage, Le Mans made up so much ground and beat Fignon. But you brought up a great point that, okay, it's not like they didn't know about the benefit of aero, right? Earlier in the tour, Le Mans had gained a lot of ground.
There was a long time trial, much longer than the last day in the '89 tour. And Greg took something like 2.5 minutes out of Fignon with Boone Lennon's aero bars and disc wheel and aero helmet. And so I'm like, guys, do the math. In 50 Ks, he took 3 minutes out of you. What's he going to do to you in 30 Ks? You only have a 58-second advantage.
Yeah.
Do the math. Maybe try them. He also had 2.5 weeks in between those stages to maybe try them out, maybe get a stopwatch, maybe see how it feels. You know, you got a couple rest days, try this, you know. And I don't know if they just didn't believe in what they were seeing. But they, you know, Fignon, that was his last chance to win the Tour de France, really.
Exactly.
And it would, you know, for American cycling. And you know what ties it all together for me is the person that figured that out was an American, was Boone Lennon.
Yes.
From Idaho, right?
Yep, he's from Idaho.
And he gave a pair to Greg. Greg tried him, and he's like, "I'm going twice as fast at the same heart rate."
Yeah,
it
wasn't brain surgery.
Exactly. Yeah. So their traditionalism and hubris, and Fignon was flying. He was third on that stage, just a couple of seconds slower than his teammate Thierry Marie, who was second on the stage. And that team had used a lot of innovation over the years. Disc wheels, they had an airfoil on one of the saddles, super, you know, tiered, you know, not by any stretch of the imagination aerodynamic compared to today, but they had been on the cutting edge of the technology that was available. So it really baffled me that they wouldn't go with these, an obvious aerodynamic advantage. And now it's across the board, you know.
Oh,
if you were to say to somebody that not that long ago, people didn't believe this was an advantage, they would laugh at you. It's like the earth is flat, people. Like,
right. Well, it's funny, in our world, in triathlon, you look at Mark Allen, I think his best time was 4:28 in the bike ride over there. Now they're going, you know, 4:04, right? And the swim and the run haven't changed that much. It's the technology, it's the positioning, it's the aerodynamics, all of that. So for you, when you left roads and went to mountain bike, I think you did about 10 years of mountain biking. And what I still remember, 93, I think it was Cactus Cup, where you crashed. You freaking nearly bled out. Was that on a cactus?
I hit this artery right here, and there's still a scar there.
Oh my God!
It was this innocuous little piece of sandstone. And it was just a little lip over a, you know, I had never ridden off-road before, and I hit this little culvert and went, you know, over the bars. Yeah. And it scraped this on the sandstone and put a hole in. Rather than cut straight through it, if it had cut all the way through, the coagulants stopped the bleeding, but because there was a hole there, it was just shooting out. And I was in the middle of the desert, and I had 3 more miles to do this time trial. So when I got to the finish line, like, my whole body was covered in blood. You know, the only thing that didn't have blood on it was my other arm. So you're coming, like, and people are like, is Bob Roll wearing tights? Like, it's 100 degrees out here. So yeah, and it didn't hurt, you know. And I think I finished 11th or 12th in the time trial, but I was trying to hold my arm up in the air so it wouldn't be bleeding all over. Straight to the emergency room in Scottsdale.
So your transition from, you know, road to mountain to becoming a commentator, you know, and really one of the more renowned people in the industry, did it surprise you? Because obviously you grew up sitting at the kitchen table talking story.
Yeah,
it seemed like this was sort of a natural transition for you.
What's funny, because Outdoor Life Network was the only people covering cycling in those days, and they started with mountain bike coverage. Yep. And I was racing mountain bikes and winding down my career, and they said, "Would you like to try some commentary?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to try that." So that first was the World Championships in Mont Saint Anne in 1998, I believe. And that was, like 75 hours of live TV. We did every single junior downhill, but I was racing, so I knew everybody. Yeah. And the only thing I didn't know how to do is stop talking for the commercials.
I've always had that problem too. Yeah.
Yeah. And the producer was like, he's like, yeah. Behind the camera,
wrap it up.
I'm like, his problem. I'm talking.
Yeah.
And one thing at our dinner table, if you interrupted, you would get punished.
Right. Yeah.
And you would lose your chance to talk. So we learned not to interrupt. So I'm like, this dude is interrupting me.
What's he doing?
In trouble. So it was not as smooth as transition as you would imagine, but the actual commentary was, well informed enough to be hired permanently. And then they transitioned from mountain biking to road racing when they got the rights to the Tour de France starting in 2001. And they're like, wait a minute, this guy did the Tour de France already. This guy is like
perfect.
Already been a road racer in Europe. So I started we started doing more road racing in 2001. And consequently, Lance Armstrong had started winning the Tour de France in 1999. And so everybody was curious about it. It actually made that network very valuable.
Absolutely.
And I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then,
and also Lance was a guy who you were down in Boone with after he was coming back from cancer. Did 8 days of just horrific weather and long rides, and really helped him get his love back of cycling.
That was 96.
96, I'm sorry,
Yeah. And
no, he was diagnosed, was it 96 or 98? Well, either way.
98, you're right.
Yeah, 98.
That was 1998. So yeah, he had 97, he was unwell.
Yes.
Went through treatment. And then that in 99 was one of the most astounding comebacks and that has gotten I think a little bit, everything that's happened since then.
Right.
The basic story though is, Lance had cancer, nearly died, and a couple 2.5 years later won the Tour de France. I mean, that actually happened.
Right.
And I don't think people have lost how desperate it was for Lance in those early days after his diagnosis and the early part of his treatment.
Right.
And to see that, personally uphand, like firsthand, and then see him win the Tour de France and have already tried to win the Tour de France and tried with my teammates to win the Tour de France and know, like, oh my God. So, not knowing everything that was going on, for me, when I look back at that, I'm glad I didn't know all that stuff, because, and for millions of people suffering with cancer at the time, it was a massive accomplishment and an unbelievable comeback. That can't be denied, really.
What they can't deny is how many people he inspired to get off the couch and no matter what they were dealing with, to attack life.
Yes.
Because that's what he represented. So yeah, as I look around my house here, I've got 3 Ride for the Moroses posters sitting in front of me. Plus I've got the, Giro glasses that they did when Lance won the first tour and all that type of stuff. So
awesome.
Yeah.
It's a complicated story.
We're conflicted,
a lot of layers to it.
A lot of layers. So we have a question from one of our viewers. Who is the greatest cyclist you have covered at Tour de France?
Wow. That I've covered. I think we're seeing right now Tadej Pogačar.
Yes.
They're comparing him to Eddie Merckx now because every time he races, he tries to win. Like, it doesn't matter if it's February or October. It doesn't matter if it's the Olympics, a small stage race in Slovenia, or the Tour de France. And he's tried it twice and won both. And it doesn't seem like anybody is going to be able to beat him unless there's some sort of,
crash or something like that.
Some silly, bad luck. So I think Tadej Pogačar is the most talented cyclist. I mean, he won Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Tour de France. Everything he does, he's very close to winning or wins every single race he does. And it's amazing the level of cycling to have somebody like that in this day and age. It's really astounding how good Tadej Pogačar is. Time trial, he'll sprint you like Eddie Merckx would sprint you.
Oh yeah.
You're not, Nairo Quintana probably won't sprint you on a flat stage, but that is that level of competitiveness and ability and talent. It's been the last couple of years has been great to watch him. It hasn't made the racing boring, especially the first year he won the Tour de France, because Primož Roglič had the jersey and was the dominant rider till the last time trial. And so last year he was close to the best. And then in the last couple of stages in the mountains, it was obvious that he was the best guy in the race. There was no question about it. And it's been, I think that he's probably, to think that he can be so successful, so consistently with the current level of professional cycling is absolutely astounding.
So in your racing career, what do you look at as your best day on the bike?
Best day?
Yeah.
My best day,
yeah, maybe best day you ever had.
I lived above Como, Italy.
Yeah.
In a little village called Brunate.
Yeah.
And there was a cog railroad, a funicolare, that went from Como up to Brunate. I'm still there. And I mean, this thing is 10Ks, like straight up, like really very hard, with switchbacks and a tiny little road. And it's a place where the Milanese glitterati had built summer homes because it's so hot in Milan. And this place is so high above the lake that it's nice and cool, or at least cooler. And so the day after the Tour of Romandy in 1988, I did a loop around the entire Lake Como, which I think is about 150 Ks. And on the way up to Brunate, it was just one of those magical moments. And I looked down and I had done 3/4 of the climb, and I hadn't shifted out of the big chain ring. I was just, that's the best day.
Just flowing. You're just flowing along and not even realizing I'm in my big gear and I'm just cruising here.
Yeah, we didn't have power meters in those days, but I was really intrigued at what the power numbers were.
That's weird.
No, that was the best day I ever had. I wasn't at a race even, so.
Yeah. So do you remember when you first started working with Phil and with Paul?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Those were some of the wildest times, because Paul Sherwin was on fire, and very classic British commentators. But afterwards, it was just a bacchanalian insanity when I probably did long-term damage to my liver in those years. And
those guys can drink.
Yeah, until he stopped drinking. But I was like toe to toe with those guys, and they had already destroyed the career of hundreds of journalists who tried to drink with them. And me and Paul found kindred spirits in each other, because we could, go that deep into the night until our demons would have, sort of calm down and could let us sleep until doing the job again. And TV is it's not an easy job. It's like a very intense few hours, really intense. And so the sort of anti-venom to being that like in those intensive hours, when so much information you have to process, and Paul was an absolute master at doing all of those things. But the first few evenings and days of working with Phil and Paul, I love the drinking afterwards and the socializing. Yes. And in those days, Lance was winning the Tour, so yeah, there were just unlimited opportunities to socialize with people. Yeah, and we took advantage of all of those.
Exactly.
Not at the Tour de France, because you're traveling to the next day's stage, so there's not as many opportunities. But the whole rest of the year was just awesome. It was so much fun. And so, seeing how much Phil and Paul enjoyed what they were doing and how good they were, how legendary, that, for me, it was just another one of those magical times to be where I was at that time. But meeting them, they were the standard this is the English commentary. This is it. And to be able to work with them at the tour. And in those days, we did the Giro, all the classics.
Vuelta, yeah.
Vuelta, Worlds. And so Paul and I became very, very close. And he stopped drinking 6 or 7 years ago. And so, that allowed me to taper way back. And it's become and so, I don't see being professionally being the same person without Phil and Paul myself.
It changes things. As a guy who rode the tour and rode so many of the major races, coming into it as a commentator, how different was that? Because you're so insulated as a cyclist. It's like you race, you eat, sleep, race again.
Yeah, it helps you understand what they're going through. And every day I'm on TV talking about it, I give thanks that I'm not in the race anymore.
Yeah,
doing it, because it's so hard, and the guys are suffering like animals, and that hasn't changed.
No, in fact, it's probably gotten worse.
Yeah, I think it's like start to finish, every race all year long is incredibly difficult. It makes Tadej Pogačar so special as an athlete, but also like Christian and I now, when we're getting ready for to call a race, we look at the profile and we say the same thing. I'm glad I'm not doing this one. And then after every race, we say the same thing. Oh my God, I'm glad I'm talking about it and not doing it. So yeah, it's good though. I think it does help to have done all of those races. It's sometimes your obligations to, the audience don't you have, a lot of things that have to be said. Mm-hmm. And so your responsibility is to make sure you tick all those boxes. And so sometimes the basic humanity of what the men and women are going through is something that I'd like to in the future remind people, like, this is what the sport is about on the most basic level. And so, well, this year I'm hoping to get back to that a little bit more. And in the early years, when Phil and Paul and I were really explaining the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
And people were so curious about the sport because Lance was dominating the tour for 7 years. That was, that done. We did, have a very different commentary then than we do now.
Of course.
And so I think people have a better understanding of what they're watching, but we still have a really, tremendous responsibility to explain things based on our experiences.
Of course.
And without, bragging about your career. That's the fine balance, And a lot of ex-cyclists, they have a tendency to, well, if it was me, I did win this, and then you kind of lose what the riders are going through. So I try to not talk about that, but yeah, it's really intense experience, and I love doing the commentating. It's just phenomenal. It's great.
So one question came in: what's your most treasured item that you kept from your racing days?
Woo-wee. Gosh. Yeah, I don't really sort of.
You collect memories. You collect.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a lot of memorabilia. Gosh. Andy gave us each a pink jersey at the end of the Giro that
he
we
won.
So
that's cool.
Probably, yeah. I have that in my bike room. I have that in a frame.
There you go. Is there a small European race from your racing period that you would recommend today to somebody?
To watch or to do?
I would say to do.
Oh man. Wow. I think racing in Italy, the smaller stage races in Italy, is great food, passionate fans, decent weather usually. Any of those. Don't do the Giro. That's don't even think about doing the Giro. Go straight to the Tour, because the Giro is twice as hard and you get half as much credit. So go straight to the Tour de France.
Brutal, right?
Yeah, it's just absolutely grim. And the Vuelta, don't ever do the Vuelta.
What's your proudest achievement, both inside and outside of the sport?
Well, I paid for my daughter's college education.
That's yeah.
And so she just graduated without any student loans. And in bike racing, just to be one of the pioneers has been more and more important to me, and having the imagination to believe it was possible in spite of all the contrary evidence at the time.
I still love the guy sitting in Berkeley watching you.
Yeah, the bike club was like, wait a minute, that dude is doing Paris-Roubaix, that's impossible.
We drop him every week. What's it? He's racing.
Yeah.
Paris-Roubaix. Bobby, I appreciate you taking so much time.
My pleasure.
Always so much fun to chat with you. And let's go. We'll see. I have a close here. It says, if you have further questions or feedback, please reach out to the speakers directly or send an email to info@enduranceexchange.com. We also ask you to take the session survey, which can be found to the right of this video on your web browser or the Endurance Exchange app, and say how much you enjoyed listening to two fun guys just chat about really, really old stuff, which is cool. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning, March 2nd, for a morning of Pilates, which Bob and I both do religiously on a daily basis. Yes, we do. Bobke, you are the best, man.
Thanks,
you see Ned out there, say hi to him for me.
I'll say hey to Ned.
Tell him your scrambler broke down while you were duck hunting and you need someone to come fix it.
I'm going to ask him about Amway. That I didn't know about the Amway chapter.
Yeah. I told him, I said, Ned, you're going to buy the product and then you're going to end up giving it away.